Okay, I want to welcome everyone to today's sustainability seminar. My name is Nancy Holm. I'm Assistant Director here at ISTC and the seminar organizer along with Beth Brzezinski. And we have a number of seminars that will be coming up in the next few weeks, and flyers for those seminars here on the table outside this conference room, and then also for those listening online, those are available on our website under events. A special note is that we have rescheduled the talk by Dr. Eric Messinet that was supposed to be on February 12th, but we had to cancel that due to technical difficulties. That webinar is now rescheduled for May 7th at noon. And in between now and then, we have two other seminars, one on April 9th and then the other on April 30th. So please plan to join us for those talks. In case you can't attend that day, all of the seminars are recorded and archived on our website. We have over 100 available there from the last 7 years. So it usually takes us about a week for the video and PowerPoints to be posted on the website after the presentation date. So with that, I'd like to begin today's seminar. I want to ask everyone in attendance here if you could silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. And then we'll also, as we usually do, is hold all the questions to the end of the presentation, and then I'll take those. I'll walk around with the microphone and so we can record your questions. And for those listening online, we'll also be taking questions from you. You can type those in at any time, and then our moderator will relay those questions to our speaker for today. So we are very pleased to have as our guest speaker Dr. David Brune. He's a professor in the Department of Agriculture Systems Management in the College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources at the University of Missouri. He earned his PhD from the University of Missouri in agricultural engineering. He also has his MS degree from Missouri. That's also in agricultural engineering. And then he has his BS degree from Missouri in sanitary engineering. Dr. Brune's research is focused on the areas of bioprocessing and bioenergy engineering, algal culture, aquaculture, particularly of shrimp, and agricultural water quality. Today he's going to be detailing his work on bioprocessing of microbial biomass enabling sustainable zero-discharge seafood production. So with that, I'll turn it over to our speaker.
All right. Well, I guess, can everybody hear me okay? That's the first question. I'm only one state away from you, but this is the first time I've ever been here. And I got to tour today, and it's fantastic. I wish I'd come sooner. There's some really, really wonderful work going on here. So I'm here today to try to tell you a little bit about some of my experience in aquaculture. Bioprocessing of microbial biomass is a technique that I guess I've developed. I don't know if anybody else is doing this particular technique, so I'll see if I can't describe to you what it's all about. And enabling zero-discharge aquaculture or zero-discharge seafood production is the goal. So that's the long title. How do I make this thing work? Hey, there you go. How about that? Technology is wonderful when it works. This is the short title. Zero-discharge aquaculture is what we're here to talk about. Cost and energy analysis is necessary because if it's not economical and it's not energetically efficient, it still doesn't work. So we have several levels of issues that we have to deal with. So this is basically what I'll go over fairly quickly. I'm going to talk about marine shrimp specifically because it's one of the higher value cash crops that we can go after. I spent somewhere between 25 and 30 years working on this, so I'm going to try to condense it as quickly as I can. Development of zero-discharge aquaculture started with catfish culture at Clemson University. Then from 89 to 2008, we got started doing shrimp culture around 2001, mainly because internationally shrimp culture has the greatest potential economic and environmental impact. And then shrimp culture at the University of Missouri, I got to the University of Missouri back in 2008, and we got the facility built and running in 2011. Then I'll give you a little bit of background about marine shrimp production. Why is zero discharge important, and how are we going to do it? What's the importance of aquaculture, importance of zero discharge, and then the idea of bioprocessing in achieving zero discharge. I'll show you a little data from our production trials in 2013, and then show you some quick energy and economics, the challenges, what's next, and try to end up with a few observations. This started back in Clemson when I got there in 1989. The basic problem that aquaculture in the South was faced with is that the U.S. EPA was telling catfish farmers, you got to stop discharging water into public waters. And this was really bad news. This threatened to shut them down because at the time they depended upon throwing water away in order to make their systems work. So this was the challenge that I was faced with. So how do you solve the problem? Well, basically what I did is I modified pond aquaculture into what I called partitioned aquaculture, partitioning the fish culture from the waste treatment. And so the technique is one of using paddle wheels to move water around in a circle, which is a technique that I stole from Cal Berkeley. Bill Oswald was using this to treat sewage. And it produces what's called a high-rate algal pond. And then we did the same thing with paddle wheels at the exit of raceways to grow fish. And so we crowded the fish up into 5% of the pond, and we turned pond fish culture into raceway culture, and we increased the rate of algal growth by moving the algae around with these paddle wheels. The end result is that the algae, this green water in these ponds, could grow 5 times faster than it could in a typical still water pond. Growing algae 5 times faster means 5 times more ammonia assimilation rate, means 5 times more feed, ultimately means 5 times more fish production. And that's exactly what happened. Over a period of several years, we were able to push pond fish production from 5,000 pounds per acre to nearly 20,000 pounds per acre by doing this. And the fish were being grown in raceways, which it turns out is a much better way to grow fish than growing them in a pond. Easier to harvest, easier to manage your health, easier to feed. Everything about it is better. By 2001, we put up a greenhouse because we're growing a tropical animal and also because it's salt water. And so we needed a greenhouse to keep the rain from washing the salt out. And we discovered that we were able to produce 35,000 pounds of shrimp per acre in a closed system. And keep in mind that conventional shrimp farmers and fish farmers at this time were growing 5,000 pounds per acre. So this was amazing, the difference in what we were doing. And we ran it green and brown. And I'll talk about this in more depth. That is brown water culture, but you can also run it green. And one of the things that we did is I spent time investigating the difference between green and brown, looking at the ecology of the system. Basically, what happens is you push feed into the system and increase the ammonia loading rate of that system. Eventually, you get to the point where the algae can't keep up. They can't grow fast enough to assimilate ammonia. And the system at that point must transform itself and will do it on its own, become a nitrifying brown water system. And so we defined the limits between brown and green water and figured out exactly how much we can grow to keep green and how much we can grow if we're running a brown water system. By 2009, I was at the University of Missouri. The Dean of Agriculture gave me some startup money, and of course the first thing I did is I went out and I started building stuff. I started pouring concrete and I started building an aquaculture facility. The same story, not quite as big. I didn't have quite as much money as I had at Clemson, but we put in paddle wheels. We built 2 of these recirculating partitioned aquaculture system units under a greenhouse. And I also added some deep tanks at the back end of the system, which serves as supplemental waste treatment, making it possible to have 100% zero discharge. This essentially what I learned how to do after 20 years of, I hate to use this word, trial and error at Clemson. We still had some discharge at Clemson, and I finally figured out how to have no discharge. There's no pipe out of this system. It's salt water. I got no place to put it. So it has to operate completely independently of any discharge. Those blue tanks down there are brine shrimp culture. And you're going to see in just a minute that you got to do something else with the algae. You can't just grow algae forever in a zero discharge system. Things got to go someplace. So this is what bioprocessing is all about. The stuff that grows in the water to maintain the water quality has to be turned into something else to leave the system. So let me explain that in a little more detail. First of all, let's back up just a minute. Let me tell you a little bit about shrimp production. We import 1.2 billion pounds of shrimp into the U.S. every year, most of it from Asia. We consume 1.4 billion pounds. So if you go to Red Lobster and you eat shrimp, it probably came from Asia. And it probably came from China. We sent a lot of money out of this country to buy shrimp. And most of those shrimp in Asia are grown in ponds in which the water is dumped into estuaries. In China, 10 times more shrimp wastewater is going into their coastal zone than all other industrial waste combined. It's massive. It is massive. The other issue is that shrimp are fed a high-protein diet in which a significant portion of the protein comes from marine fish meal. Nearly a third of global fish meal is now going into industrial shrimp production in Asia. So we're fishing out fish from the ocean, grinding them up, turning them into a diet, and turning that into pollution. Can you imagine anything more unsustainable? That's about as unsustainable as it gets. So this is a pretty bad story. And we're the guys sending the money over there to make it happen. We're the guys sending the money over to make it happen. So this is the bad news. Also, around just short of 1990, wild catch leveled off. We're fishing out the oceans. No more protein is coming. No more increase in marine proteins coming from the oceans. If we're going to increase seafood protein, it must come from aquaculture. So aquaculture has to get bigger. It will get bigger. But we can't do it like this. That simply has to stop. And Asians know it will eventually have to stop. It's just that it's cheap for them to do it, and they're getting away with it, and they're allowed to do it. And they're going to keep doing it as long as they're allowed to get away with it. Okay, so why is zero-discharge aquaculture needed? It turns out that after you go to all the trouble to make this high-dollar diet, soy, corn, and fish meal, only a small fraction of the nitrogen from that diet actually turns into your product, your target product. 12 to 20% of the protein in the feed is converted to fish or shrimp. The bulk of the nitrogen becomes a waste. Now, this is animal agriculture. It doesn't make a difference whether it's a pig or it's a fish. It's the same. This is just the nature of animal agriculture. So the bulk of your nitrogen is getting thrown away. This is why they're throwing the water away. So if we don't want to throw the water away, what are we going to do with that nitrogen? That waste nitrogen must be reused or disposed of. Treated, recovered, or used, or recovered using one of three techniques. We can grow algae on it, and we can use photosynthesis to elevate the ammonia to algal biomass. We can use bacterial nitrification, and we can convert the ammonia to bacterial biomass, a small amount of bacterial mass. Here, ammonia is converted to a large amount of algal biomass, or we can denitrify it, or we can add sugar and grow heterotrophic organisms and incorporate the nitrogen again into a large amount of bacterial biomass. In the algal and heterotrophic cases, we get large quantities of microbial sludge. Now, this becomes another problem. So now we'd have to be throwing away sludge, or we can recover, convert that microbial biomass as a food, feed, fuel, or fertilizer, which is the best case scenario. So here's some pictographs that make it easier to see. So the input is this high-value feed. Sun shines on the water, green water system, very highly photosynthetic, and the end result is that continuous algal production, which maintains the water quality, makes it possible to grow 35,000 pounds of shrimp per acre. We use brine shrimp. When I was a kid, they used to sell them in the back of comic books, right? Sea monkeys. And you'd hatch them and watch them swim around and flush them down the toilet, you know. But that's basically what it is. It's a very hardy organism. It grows very fast, 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks to an adult. So we can convert algae directly into brine shrimp. And guess what that could be? Fish meal. There's your replacement fish meal. So this becomes a machine that makes its own fish meal, and we don't have to import the fish meal. Or we can grow tilapia. Tilapia will also fix algae, and this can become human food. Human food and animal feed, and then anything that's not turned into tilapia or brine shrimp is turned into a fecal pellet that settles rapidly, and then we can send that to a digester and extract the energy. Green water coming in, clear water going out, fecal pellets. And then anything that's recalcitrant, like phosphorus or metals, winds up in the sludge of that deep tank. That's why I put it in a deep tank. Metals and phosphates wind up precipitating out and producing a slow-release biofertilizer. Everything's recovered, nothing's thrown away. That's what has to happen if you're going to do zero discharge. And there are some other complicated issues. There can't be too much metal in that system, or this becomes a problem. And in fact, the feeds that we get out of the ocean today do have too much metals in them. We get lead, cadmium, and mercury in here. But the good news is with the deep tank technique, the metals are here and not in the shrimp. In the ponds in Asia, it winds up getting into the shrimp, and the shrimp that you eat that comes from Asia have high levels of metals. They don't tell you that, but it's got high levels of metals in it because they're reducing the amount of water they discharge from their ponds. Or we can do it this way. We can buy a tank of sugar and pump it in. The sun's gone. We don't need solar energy anymore. Feed and sugar make brown water, make a heterotrophic bacteria. Everything else is pretty much the same. The only difference is instead of using solar energy to elevate ammonia to biomass, now we use sugar energy to elevate ammonia to biomass. Of course, the bad news there is we've got to have sugar, which means it has to come from conventional agriculture, right? So I think obviously this is not as sustainable, but this is what most people do because it's more predictable and it's more consistent in its behavior, and it doesn't depend on the sun to shine. So we got a little bit of a challenge there. There's another way. You can take your time and forget the sugar, forget the sun, and allow the culture to mature into a fully nitrifying culture. They're slow. They're slow to grow, and they're slow to respond to increases in loading rate. They're slow to respond to changes in temperature. But ultimately, they don't produce near as much sludge, and they also get the job done. They allow you to maintain water quality, which is the secret to making the system work at these high loading rates. And you do get some of these byproducts, but by mass balance, most of the nitrogen and carbon dioxide becomes non-polluting gases in the system. In other words, most everything gets respired away. Again, from a sustainability point of view, that's not really what you want to do. But from a shrimp growing point of view, less stuff to have to mess with, right? Less stuff to have to mess with. So those are the three techniques that are out there and available to us. The technique of using brine shrimp, that's probably, I guess I'm the only guy around that's doing brine shrimp. I ran two 2,000-liter brine shrimp reactors, which turns out is way more than is necessary to take care of the water in my little 1/20th of an acre system. I could do 5 times more surface area with these 2 tanks. So I actually had to choke these tanks back in order to keep them from overfeeding on the algae. I ran one with tilapia and one with shrimp. This is the marine shrimp. This is the Pacific white shrimp, or Vaname. When you go to Walmart and buy shrimp, that's the one you're buying. You go to Red Lobster, that's the one you're eating. Almost everybody's growing Vaname or the Pacific white. And the main reason is that this shrimp is not cannibalistic. You can raise them at 200 or 300 per square meter and they don't eat each other. A lot of the other shrimp wind up, you try to raise them in high density, you wind up with one really big shrimp. These guys are not so cannibalistic. I have a long history of working with brine shrimp. When I was out at Davis, we actually filed a patent on a physical system to maintain the brine shrimp at high density. Also developed process diagrams showing how these animals would convert algae. The take-home message here is the amazing thing about brine shrimp is that if you get the right cell concentration throughout the lifetime of the animal, you can get as much as 50% conversion. I don't think there's any other critter out there that will do that. In other words, a pound of algae dry weight will make a half a pound of brine shrimp dry weight. That's about as good as it gets in ecology. So that's quite impressive. Of course, if you grow them wrong, in other words, if you try to let them clean the algae too low, you get next to nothing in terms of conversion. All they do is just maintain, which is the reason why you can't overeat your algae. Those 2 blue tanks there at the end could take it almost down to clear water, and then I get almost 0 conversion efficiency. So there's a little bit of optimization has to go on, which is part of the reason why a lot of people don't do this stuff, because they say, well, it's already a lot of trouble to grow shrimp. Now you got to worry about this too. Too many things to worry about. But I'll tell you what I've learned is that if you keep it balanced, it works like a charm. Works like a charm. You just got to pay attention and keep it balanced. That's the trick. A little bit of data. Some take-home messages here. Stocking and harvesting in 2013, I had 250 animals per square meter. They're called specific pathogen-free shrimp. Guys make a living selling shrimp that are supposed to be completely free of any pathogens. Of course, what that really means is they're free of any pathogens they can detect. It doesn't mean there's not any other pathogens out there. Yeah, they are, but they're free of anything they can detect. The end result is we did 100 days, and we had 23 count shrimp. You go down to the supermarket, those are jumbos. Those are the jumbos. So we can make jumbo shrimp in 100 days. You don't have to be a mathematician to figure out that that's like 3 crops a year. That's pretty good. 3 crops a year is something that's worth $5 or $6 a pound, and you're doing somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000 pounds per acre. That sounds like pretty good income, and it is. It's very good income, but it's also expensive to run. At this time, I was running about 20,000 pounds per acre. Probably could do twice that. And I was using a 35% protein food conversion, 2 to 1, which is not bad for this system. You see, we peaked in, around September in the diet, and now, of course, I was also running tilapia for comparison's sake. And then you can see the size increase over time. Okay. So all this is great, but of course, as far as a farmer is concerned, he's got to make money. And so it all comes down to how much money can you make? Well, there's many different ways. We've already talked about 3 different ways to grow it. And then it turns out there's a lot of different carrying capacities that we can look at. I looked at basically 10,000 pounds per acre, 12,000 pounds per acre, 27,000 pounds, and 45,000 pounds. 45,000 pounds is my best engineering guess as to what is a sustainable maximum carrying capacity for this system. There are people out there that have claimed higher. I don't think it's going to be sustainable. And 27,000 pounds I think we can do without breaking a sweat. Now remember, 27,000 pounds per acre every 100 days when the normal fish farmer would grow 5,000. You don't need statistics to figure out that that's a pretty good increase, right? That's an amazing change. So what I did is I set up enterprise budgets looking at these different carrying capacities. This is a tropical pond green water alone. So I've got the most super intensive system versus what they do in Asia, basically. And then I've got feed and sugar with a greenhouse, 2 crops, feed and sugar in a greenhouse with a nursery, 3 crops, feed and nitrification with a greenhouse, 2 crops, and feed and sugar in an R30 building with a nursery, 4.6 crops. Feed and sugar, so the maximum that you could do would be 45,000 pounds per acre carrying capacity using feed and sugar to get the shortest cycle with a nursery. If you have a nursery, basically what you do is you grow the animals to 1 gram in a super concentrated footprint, then you transfer those animals to your grow out, and you make a crop every 90 days instead of every 100 days. So that's the high end, and then the low end is a fed tropical pond with 3 crops a year. So here I'm talking about Missouri or Illinois with an R30 building, and it's 0 outside, and it's 85 degrees inside, and I'm raising tropical shrimp. And so the first thing that comes to your mind, heating costs must be horrendous. No, it doesn't cost anything to heat it. How's it possible? Because I got 100 horsepower per acre aeration. When you got 100 horsepower per acre aeration and R30 insulation, you don't have to heat it. The limiting factor is the ventilation through the building. The heat loss is no longer through the walls, it's the amount of air you have to put into the building to replace the oxygen. And that ultimately becomes a limiting factor. I actually had to do the heat balance on that about 4 times to convince myself that that was actually right, that actually works. Well, I didn't have the money to pay an ag economist, so I had to do this thing myself. Boy, was this boring. But it was a lot of work, but this is where the rubber meets the road, because this is what it's all about. You have to define all of your inputs, outputs, all the costs, all the energy, and then what the net production and net yields are. Some other interesting things. One of the big costs, of course, not surprising, feed. Feed can range from anywhere from 20 to 40% of the total cost of the thing. Another thing that perhaps is not quite so obvious is depreciation is big. In a marine system, replacement cost is high. These are corrosive systems. They eat everything up. Your paddle wheels are rusting. All of your systems get replaced every 3 to 5 years, basically. And that's expensive. Interestingly enough, because interest rates are fairly low now, the interest is not as bad as the depreciation itself. The depreciation is a big bite. And then the other cost, stocking. Stocking is not insignificant. Stocking typically runs around 16 to 18%. So that's, which means if you were going to do this big time, you'd build yourself a hatchery and nursery. You'd have your own hatchery nursery. You'd be vertically integrated. So the bottom line, when it's all said and done, we look at production, we look at capital investment and price. What's it boiled down to? Well, of course, the insulated building, producing 4.6 crops a year using sugar at 45,000 pounds, turns out that it's close, but it's going to give you the most, 200,000 pounds per year of production, which is a lot. That's a lot of production. If you get $5 a pound, that's $1 million an acre a year cash flow. A lot of cash flow for that system. It's close to being the most economical, but it turns out that the food and sugar, 3 crops a year, for whatever reason, was slightly less. Now, I don't know if this is all that significant, the difference between these in here. Pretty similar. Now, the thing that is hugely different, though, 1.6 million capital investment for that insulated building. versus about 600 or 700,000 for a greenhouse. So the big difference in capital investment is greenhouse versus insulated building versus the other jump, the tropical pond. In Asia, they're just building a lined pond and they're only spending about $100,000 an acre. That's the reason why they're sending shrimp over here for $2.85 a pound and killing us. $2.85 a pound because they've got this tropical conditions with open air. They're getting their salt for free. They're throwing their water away for free. Their labor costs are low, and it's only cost them $100,000 an acre to build the system. Now they're only producing 30,000 pounds per acre, but their input costs are so much lower that they're able to beat us in terms of the cost per pound. So if you look down here, we're going anywhere from $8 a pound to $3.60 a pound. And I also did the energy. It's interesting that the insulated building, you would have thought it would have been energy inefficient. And again, it turns out to be the most energy efficient in terms of kilowatt hours per pound of shrimp. And again, the reason for that is we're reclaiming the waste heat from the aeration, holding it into the building. And that's the reason why it's energy efficient. Put it in a bar graph so we can see it. Here's the retail. Retail varies widely on shrimp, anywhere from around $3.50 a pound and up to around almost $10 a pound. Now this is heads on. This is heads on. It's not the way you buy shrimp. When you go to the store, you buy shrimp heads off. So you're buying tails. So and 60% dress out. So when you buy tails at $6 a pound, it's like $3 a pound. Heads on. Okay, so retail here, here's Asian. Asian from $2 to $4 a pound. Chinese shrimp coming in at about $2.80. And we've got almost all of our systems are right, our best of our intensive systems are right at the top end of Asian production. We can't go head-to-head with them economically. We cannot go head-to-head with them. They can make shrimp cheaper than we can. But remember, we're doing this here in the United States, and we're not throwing away water. And potentially, we wouldn't have to import fish meal to do it. But we've got to get at least $4 and probably $5 a pound. So we've got to have niche markets where people will pay more money for a higher quality shrimp grown sustainably. Where have you heard that story before, right? Yeah. The thing that's about energy, now we do really well in energy. Asian intensive is not that much better than a lot. Now some of these are not so good, but we've got several of these that are head-to-head competitive with the Asian intensive. And if you compare it to our conventional meats, beef, of course, beef is through the roof. We've always known that. Beef is very energy intensive because of the low conversion efficiency, the long growth cycle. Pork is a little better, but not much. Poultry is about as good as it gets. Even caged salmon is a fairly high energy intensive animal product. But we can produce high quality marine shrimp at fairly efficient energy price in these intensive systems. And part of that has to do with the intensity. When you do 35,000 pounds per acre, the footprint makes the energy intensity not so bad, basically. Using energy more efficiently is what it boils down to. So that's the energy footprint. So energy, we look good. Money-wise, we got to get top price for a high-value product. And then there are these other issues with respect to making this happen. I get phone calls every week. Should I do this? Let's get started. This sounds like it has a potential to be a billion-dollar industry. Yeah, exactly. But there's some problems. Okay, significant capital investment. If you're going to do 365 days a year's production, you've got to have at least $1.6, $1.7 million per acre. Bankers aren't going to give you the money. They consider this unproven technology. That means investors got to do it, and so you know what comes with that. With investors comes all kinds of strings, right? IP, they want patents, and they want ownership, on and on and on and on and on. Will U.S. consumers pay more for sustainably produced, locally reared, higher quality fresh seafood? And how much more? This is a great big question. If I produce my shrimp and people buy them and eat them and I get $6 a pound, heads on, they come back and say, those are wonderful, I want some more. Or they come back and say, I'm going down to Walmart and get shrimp for $2.85 a pound. Dead. It's just that simple. If they spice them up and have a six-pack of Budweiser and eat Walmart shrimp, I can't compete. I can't compete. It's got to be high-quality stuff going to restaurants or people who are willing to pay high dollar for high-quality shrimp. That absolutely has to happen. And the only way we're going to answer that question is by doing it. Surveys don't work. You have to put the shrimp on the plate and see what happens, right? It means you have to take the risk. You just have to do it. You have to take the risk and see what you can get for it. And here's the other problem is, soybean farmer, corn farmer cuts his corn, he drives it to the elevator and he unloads it. We ain't got one of those for shrimp. We got to get them on ice and we got to get them distributed. And so we've got to have a distribution network, and this is a perishable product. Now we can freeze them, but of course the minute we freeze them, there's going to be a lot of people that say, well, this is frozen product, Walmart's got a frozen product. We really want to sell a fresh product. So we got to move them fast, and we can't make anybody sick. Never make anybody sick. This is not a small problem. This is a big issue. It's going to take somebody with a significant amount of money to get into this. It isn't just about growing shrimp. It's about having trucks and ice houses and distribution network and grocery stores and restaurants that are going to take this stuff. And how much are they going to take? And when are they going to take it? And where are my drivers? You know, I've done this so many times, and I sit down and I look at this, and I'm going to be UPS. I'm not going to be a shrimper. I'm going to be UPS here. You know, there's a lot of issues. So what's next? Freshwater. Across the South, our little partitioned aquaculture system has taken off. Most catfish farmers now are using a modified version of our technique called the split pond. It's also a zero-discharge system, but it's poorly understood. If we want to expand it across the South, we need to spend some time understanding exactly how and why it works and how to optimize it. If we go saltwater, my next thing at the University of Missouri is I need to find the money to scale this thing up to about a ½ acre. There are scale-up issues and there's cost issues. I can use high-density polyethylene lined raceways to significantly reduce the cost. That's the next thing to do. Green water versus brown water. Should we do green water? It's more sustainable, but brown water is faster and more reliable. Probably going to be a transition. We'll probably start with brown water and transition to green water as we get better, and as the Asia quit discharging. When they quit discharging, prices of shrimp are going to rise internationally. And then we can probably shift to green water. And the economics of both. What's the optimum economics for the best management practice? And then eventually we've got to develop an outreach and operator training. So, you know, we got a few things to do here, which leads to my last statement here, ideas versus experience. It's not hard to have ideas. When I was a graduate student, I had ideas about doing this. And you know, in the decades that I've been a professor, all the way back to when I was a graduate student, the way we live hasn't changed all that much. It really hasn't. We got cell phones and we got computers, but the fact of the matter was, when I was a graduate student, my metabolic needs is like a 100-watt light bulb. My energy usage, your energy usage, is 100-watt light bulbs. Use 100 times more energy than your metabolic needs. Agriculture, American agriculture, 12 times more energy input than energy output in terms of food. That hasn't changed in 30 years. It's still the same. So I knew as a graduate student that we need to change this. We need to do something about this. So, of course, being a naive graduate student, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix this. We're going to fix this. Okay, 30-some years later, sustainable agriculture as a template for sustainable society. Okay, well, we're not going to probably fix society. I'm not going to fix society. maybe the best I can do is fix agriculture, huh? Maybe instead of eating oil, maybe we could eat solar energy. Then after a while, well, maybe I can't fix agriculture, but maybe I can fix aquaculture, huh? Maybe I can fix aquaculture. What should it be? It should be solar driven. It should mimic nature, right? Agro-ecosystems should mimic nature. Nutrients should be recycled, and solar energy should be the driver, not fossil fuels producing pollutants. That's what we do now. Fossil fuels are cheap, so we mine phosphorus, we fix nitrogen, and it's so cheap we just let it pour out into the groundwater and out into the estuaries because it's not worth recovering. We shouldn't do that. But it's a challenge, especially when gas is $2 a gallon. When gas is $2 a gallon, it's really a challenge. And the Asians are making shrimp at $2.80, and for me to do it sustainably, I got to have $4 or $5 a pound. So these are the challenges. So ideas are wonderful, but experience is tough. Experience is tough. And I guess I better stop. I think that's where I stop and see if I can answer any questions. Oh, yeah.
And do we have some questions here from the audience? Art?
Hi. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. I just have a question in regard to your demand scenario, whether there would be buyers or not. Would this shrimp fit into the Monterey Bay certification for sustainable seafood? Are you aware of that? Because what I'm thinking is universities now fill out a ASHE STARS report, what percentage of the seafood they buy that's Monterey Bay certified. So if this would fit into that, maybe that's a solution on the demand side.
Yeah, so the question is, would our seafood pass judgment with the Monterey Bay seafood evaluation, which has several levels of sustainability. One of them is basically species extinction. So we meet the criteria there because we're not endangering anything, especially if we're avoiding the importation of marine protein. So we're way better than everybody else if we avoid that. So we avoid the marine importation, and we're growing an animal that's produced in a hatchery or a nursery. So and then the other thing we got going for us on the life cycle analysis, our energy footprint looks good. So in both cases, I think we can claim we're green here. And for people who don't like GMOs, we can feed them non-GMO feed. It costs twice as much. And I got taken to task really hard one time when I stood up and said, I'm making sustainable shrimp. And the person put up their hand and said, what kind of feed are you using? I said, I'm using the feed they got down at the feed and seed store. Well, that's GMO feed, though it's not sustainable. But it doesn't have to be. It has no impact on the water quality or the behavior of the system. You can make it be, or if you want to, you can make it be organic. Organic's a paper trail. If you got the paper trail on the feed, we can call this organic shrimp. We got the paper trail on non-GMO feed, we can call this non-GMO shrimp. That's the easy part, because that doesn't really change the behavior of the system.
So another question? Warren?
Well, yeah, as Bart said, great presentation. But your answer to him was you should be able to qualify for Monterey Bay or Fishwise or any of these other, is that part of your work plan? And maybe that's the platform toward commercialization and distribution that you were searching for.
So the question is qualification for this sort of green certification, organic certification, or Monterey Bay, is this part of my work plan? Well, I'm not going to determine that. The consumer is going to determine that. Because in the end, I'm just trying to make a system that works, and then I have to sell the product for a competitive price. And so the consumer right now are overwhelmingly voting with their dollars to buy cheap shrimp from Walmart. So yes, some people pay high dollars for the certified seafood, but the bulk of the money is supporting that non-sustainable Asian practice. And they're doing it simply because it's a cheap product. So we would have to educate the consumers, number one, and number two, Asian governments are going to have to do something about their water pollution issues. Or the farmers in Asia will self-limit themselves. And this is most likely what's going to happen. They've had, within the last year, they've had some really severe outbreaks of disease all across Asia. And it's mainly because their water quality is deteriorating to the point that it's stressing their animals. My guess is they're going to self-limit themselves.
Any other questions here?
Very interesting. You can smell, I just ate a shrimp for my lunch. My question is about, for your system, did you use some antibiotics or using some, because you have bacterial, some issue maybe sometimes. Also, do you use some, like, some medicine because for the prevent, the illness, for the, also for the feeding, the meal, like a fish, shrimp meal, does it contain some like hormone-like compounds because we want to make the fish and the shrimp grow very fast? So I just wondering for your system, does it include kind of this compound? You have this compound? If not, maybe it's okay, maybe because it looks like they are eating like organic food. If you're using this compound in your system, where does this compound go? What's their feed?
So the question was, are we enhancing the system with respect to using antibiotics to control diseases? Number one, are we doing any kind of hormonal additions? And are there any kind of contaminants that are coming into the system that we have to deal with? Okay, so with respect to disease, disease is predominantly a water quality issue. Far above all other issues, first of all, we have what's called high health shrimp. We have these specific pathogen-free shrimp, so that's important. Also, we are a long ways from the coast, so seagulls aren't coming in and dumping in disease things into our system. That's actually a good thing about being isolated and being a closed system. We're not exposed to disease. But the most important thing we do is maintain control over water quality. Most incidences of disease in shrimp come because you're stressing the shrimp with poor water quality. High ammonia levels, high nitrite levels, the shrimp begin to become stressed and then they become exposed to disease. And once they become exposed, well, they become susceptible to disease. And many diseases are endemic in their body. And once they become disease, then you're in trouble. So maintaining water quality is your very first task. So we don't use antibiotics. I had never used antibiotics. If you're using antibiotics, something's wrong. You got a problem. You got a water quality problem. Something that's not right. So if you're ever faced with that situation, you need to fix the primary problem. As with respect to enhancement, growth enhancements, I've never used them. I know people talk about them. I've never used them. And frankly, this animal grows so fast, I don't really see the need for it myself. Now, with respect to contaminants, that's actually a big issue. A lot of the feeds are coming in with low-level metals in the feeds that if you're feeding the feed directly in a pond when you're dumping the water, that's not a problem. But when you start to try to reduce the discharge from the pond, these metals accumulate in the sludge, and that's where the animal's at. And like I said, much of the Asian shrimp are coming in with elevated metals. The mercury and cadmium in my shrimp is 100 times lower than the shrimp you're buying at Walmart. Why is the metal there? It's an environmental contaminant, and it's making it into the feeds, mostly coming from the fish meal. Why is my system cleaner? Because every day I pass the entire volume of water through an anaerobic tank, and any metals are precipitated into the sludge. Now the bad news, what am I going to do with mercury and cadmium contaminated sludge? That's a problem. But if I stop importing fish meal into my system, if I start using my brine shrimp, I no longer have that problem. I could absolutely claim organic shrimp, absolutely. Question is, how much more will people pay for that organic shrimp, and how many more people will pay that much more? That's the big market issue. That's the question I can't answer.
Okay, just a second. Do we have any questions there? Okay. So.
You produce 500 pounds of shrimp periodically. Where do you dispose of it, and what price do you get?
The question is, what did I do with my shrimp from our culture operation? That was the easiest part of everything I did, is that the people at the farm took them and then came back the next day and wanted more. So I had no problem getting rid of them at $5 a pound. Everybody wanted more shrimp. I couldn't begin to supply their needs. The same problem we had in Clemson when we produced shrimp. We had a bigger system. We had people, when we told them, we'd make one phone call at the university, say we're harvesting shrimp tomorrow. People would be lined up all the way out to the highway with their freezers. We had to limit them to 20 pounds, or they'd wind up getting in fistfights over it.
The main thing I was going to say is the devil's in the details, correct?
It's what?
The devil's in the details, right?
Oh,
that's what I have to deal with all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what is your turnaround time? I got a bunch of questions, but I won't ask them all. What's your turnaround time from when the shrimp is ready to produce to the consumer? Is it like truckers call it hot load? You only have so much time unless you freeze it. I mean, you don't want to freeze. You want to keep it fresh. So what is your limit on time to get to the consumer? I mean, what is the day until the shrimp starts going bad that you have to have it to that?
So the question is essentially, what's the shelf life of an unfrozen shrimp? And this particular shrimp, another reason for using Vaname is they have a decent shelf life on ice, and the fact of that question is answered by the shrimpers. The shrimpers, they go out with a boatload of ice and they shrimp and they come in, and this shrimp might be on that ice for a week before they get to the consumer, and they're still okay. Now, of course, they're not as good a quality as the day they catch them, but that's the reality of the situation. Now, this is not true of freshwater prawns. Freshwater prawns deteriorate rapidly. They almost need to be sold live. Saltwater shrimp stays on ice for a reasonably long time. Of course, you freeze them, you got a year, but then it's a frozen product.
On prongs, I know people are taking 350-gallon totes, getting the tops off, and starting prong farms inside. Are you worried about people doing that or around? Is that something that's happening now?
People are doing these small systems, and I actually encourage that. Farmers see this and they get all excited, and the first thing they want to do, plow up the soybeans, go get a loan, and let's put this in. And I say, whoa, hold up here. Why don't you put in a couple of tanks in your backyard and see, first of all, if you can keep them alive. And then why don't you see if you can sell them, and see if people like them, and then why don't we talk? And in fact, for the people who really are serious about this, and I make this suggestion numerous times, here's what you do. Go get a U-Haul truck filled full of ice, drive to Louisiana, and buy some shrimp off the docks, and bring it up to Missouri and see if you can sell it. And exactly. And if you call me back six months or a year from now and says, I got more people than I know what to do with that want shrimp and they want to pay me $6 a pound, then let's talk about building a system. Make sure you can sell the stuff before you start building systems, and then you don't know what you're going to do with the product. Exactly.
Okay, are there any other questions here?
Thank you for the excellent presentation, Professor Brune. My question is that when you feed GMO, kind of whether it's from the corn or from the soybean or from any other source, is there any study that looks at the long-term effect on the shrimp and then the human who is consuming that?
Okay, so the question is, if we were to feed the shrimp a GMO feed as opposed to a non-GMO feed, are there impacts? Well, the answer to that question is about as clear as the answer is to the impacts on humans. I mean, there's all kinds of studies out there, anecdotal evidence in particular, that says that Roundup is leaving residues in GMO products that's threatening our health. The scientists say no. But you're talking about at a shrimp level, and I don't know how many millions of dollars it would take for me to prove or disprove that. We haven't even begun to do that. But I can tell you that as far as water quality or the technical operation of the system, you couldn't tell the difference between them. I mean, the system essentially responded to nitrogen. It's nitrogen's the issue. Nitrogen's the product we have to control in that water quality. Ammonia is what kills animals and stresses the animals. The bacteria don't care whether that nitrogen came from a GMO or non-GMO product. It just has to be transformed. As to whether there's subtle impacts on the animal's health, I don't know. I couldn't even begin to answer that question. I don't think anybody can answer that question. We've never gotten to that point. The most important issue is that non-GMO feed is going to cost you $2 instead of $1. So that's the first question you're going to have to wrestle with. We're already high-priced shrimp.
One more question about sugar. Is that the main feed material? Is that perfect feed material? What is it?
The sugar. The question is about the sugar input. The sugar is only required if we're doing a heterotrophic production, and it's not cheap. Sugar is actually a significant portion of the feed cost. The main reason for doing sugar is that the system is more responsive, so you can manage water quality more quickly. For example, if I've got a nitrifying system or even an algal system, and I come in the morning and ammonia is high, and by high I mean like 3 milligrams per liter. I want to see 1 milligram per liter of ammonia. Not a lot of ammonia in this water for these animals to be healthy. If I see 3, and if it's a nitrifying system and I make some adjustment, reduce feed, it'll take 2 days. 2 days for the ammonia to go down. If I got a sugar-driven system, I increase the sugar rate, it'll be gone in an hour.
Sugar is the perfect source then?
Well, there's all kinds of studies out there. People use tapioca, rice flour. I mean, there's a dozen different organic. Most people just put the cheapest organic they can in there. Personally, I prefer the green system to this organic-driven system. I probably shouldn't say these things, but if you walk into a system that's brown as opposed to a system that's green, the green system smells like the ocean. The brown system smells like a sewage treatment plant.
Activated sludge, right?
That is exactly what it is. And the people who do this, they call it biofloc. There's a whole society of biofloc engineers. And every time I stand up, I say growing shrimp in activated sludge. And they can't stand this because they said, no. We're not growing shrimp in activated sludge because that sounds like wastewater. And don't be saying that. And stop saying that. But that's true. That's what it is. That's what it looks like, and that's what it is. It's just that we're not putting waste in. We're putting clean organic matter in. But that's exactly what it is. But biofloc is what they prefer.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. And that's the end of today's seminar, and we